There's a book in the Bible written by a king who had already achieved everything modern self-help culture promises will finally make you happy. Not eventually, already. And his own conclusion, in his own handwriting, was that it amounted to nothing. Not almost nothing, nothing. Which raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. If the man who actually got everything still walked away empty, what exactly are the rest of us chasing? You know the feeling already, even on a much smaller scale. You finally get the new job title you've wanted for 2 years. For about a week, it feels incredible. Then, the calendar fills up the same way it always does. And by the second Monday, it's just your job again. Or you finally buy the car, the one you'd been eyeing on your phone for months, the one you told yourself would feel different. And it does, for a few days. Then, one morning you're sitting in traffic in it, and it just feels like a car.
Or maybe it was a relationship you were convinced would finally complete you, and it did, for a season, until the ordinary Tuesdays crept back in, and you found yourself scrolling again, looking for the next thing to feel that way. Nothing about the emptiness ever actually goes away. It just quietly relocates to whatever's next on the list. Here's the mechanism nobody explains to you. A new achievement becomes a routine. A routine becomes background noise. Background noise becomes invisible. And invisible becomes an itch for something newer, something bigger, something you haven't gotten used to yet. That itch isn't a personal flaw. It's not proof you're ungrateful or spoiled. Psychologists actually have a name for it, the hedonic treadmill. In 1971, researchers Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell documented how people spike in happiness after a major win, and then drift right back down to whatever baseline they started at. The most famous version of this research followed actual lottery winners and compared them to ordinary people a year or two later, and found the winners weren't meaningfully happier than everyone else. The new house gets normal. The dream car gets normal. Even the number in the bank account gets normal. Your brain isn't built to register more as permanently better. It's built to register different, briefly, and then reset. There's a second layer to this that makes it even crueler. Researchers call it the aspiration treadmill. Every time you adapt to a new level of success, your expectations quietly rise to match it. You don't just return to your old baseline. You set a new, higher finish line that's just as unreachable as the last one felt before you crossed it. The gap between where you are and where you think enough is never actually closes. It just gets rebuilt at a higher altitude every single time, which is exactly why the person with $10 million can feel just as far from enough as the person with 10,000. Scripture diagnosed this thousands of years before any psychologist had a word for it. In Ecclesiastes 2, Solomon, the same king from the opening of this video, describes an experiment he personally ran with unlimited resources. He didn't stop at one category. He tells us he tried laughter and wine first, then moved on. I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted me vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kind of fruits. I made me pools of water. I got me servants and maidens. Also, I had great possessions of great and small cattle. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men. Read that list again slowly. Real estate, agriculture, staff, livestock, liquid wealth, entertainment, luxury. Solomon is systematically working through every single category our culture still insists will finally be the one. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. This isn't hypothetical. This is the wealthiest, wisest man of his era, maxing out every option available to a human being in his position. And then look at his own verdict, in his own words. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say he didn't build enough houses. He doesn't say the vineyards weren't large enough, or the gold wasn't sufficient. He had already maxed out every category available to a human being in his position, and the verdict was still emptiness. Key takeaway. The problem was never that Solomon's success wasn't big enough. The problem was that he was asking success to do a job it was never built to do. This brings us to the ultimate pivot, a few chapters later in the same book, where Solomon actually explains why nothing under the sun was ever going to be enough. In Ecclesiastes 3:11, he writes, "He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end." Some translations render that phrase even more directly, that God has set eternity in the human heart.
Read that slowly. You weren't given a heart sized for a promotion, a car, or a bank balance. You were given a heart with eternity built into it, on purpose, by design. Here's what that means practically. Picture being genuinely, deeply thirsty and responding by eating more bread.
You could eat an entire loaf and then another, and you'd still be thirsty. Not because you didn't eat enough, but because bread was never built to solve thirst in the first place. No amount of it will ever cross over into satisfying a need it was never designed to meet. That's exactly what a promotion, a new car, or a bigger house is quietly trying to do to the ache sitting in your chest. It's real. It's not nothing. It's just answering a completely different question than the one your heart is actually asking. You can keep reaching for more bread for the rest of your life and still walk away thirsty every single time, wondering why the last loaf didn't finally work when the one before it didn't either. An eternity-shaped ache cannot be filled by anything with an expiration date, no matter how much of it you acquire. Only something eternal fits an eternity-shaped space. This is exactly where Solomon himself eventually lands, after chapters of chasing down every possible answer.
He doesn't end the book by recommending a bigger project or a better strategy. His final conclusion in Ecclesiastes 12:13 is almost startlingly simple. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Not acquire more, not optimize harder. The wisest, wealthiest man who ever lived ran the entire experiment so you wouldn't have to. And his closing argument was to return to the one relationship that was never subject to the treadmill in the first place. Here's a dangerous lie that keeps millions of otherwise successful people quietly stuck. The idolatry of the next thing. The belief that the last achievement simply wasn't the right one, and that the next promotion, the next relationship, the next milestone will finally be the one that sticks. But notice something fascinating. There is no version of enough waiting further down that road. Solomon didn't fail to find it because he stopped one house short, or one vineyard short, or one treasury short. He had already run out of categories. If unlimited resources and total freedom to pursue anything under the sun couldn't manufacture lasting satisfaction for him, no amount of scaling up your own version of the experiment is going to produce a different result for you. The lie isn't that ambition is wrong. The lie is believing the object of the ambition was ever capable of finishing the job. Now watch what the opposite looks like, lived out by a man who, in his own smaller way, had also gotten everything the world around him valued. In Luke 19, Zacchaeus is a chief tax collector, which meant he was genuinely wealthy, likely at the expense of the very community watching him. He's used to being resented, used to being talked about, used to being the man people grumble about under their breath. And yet, here he is, climbing a literal sycamore tree, straining just to catch a glimpse of Jesus passing through town. A wealthy, powerful man, reduced to acting like a curious child, because something in him is still hungry for a thing money never touched. When Jesus stops directly under that tree and invites himself to Zacchaeus' house, the crowd immediately grumbles that Jesus has gone to lodge with a sinner. Zacchaeus doesn't defend himself, and he doesn't ask Jesus for anything more. He does the opposite of what the hedonic treadmill would predict. He stands up and says, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold." He voluntarily gives away the very thing he'd spent his whole life accumulating. And Jesus' response isn't good financial decision, it's this day is salvation come to this house. Zacchaeus didn't find fullness by adding one more acquisition to the pile. He found it the moment his wealth stopped being the point, and giving it away unconditionally became the response to actually meeting God. When the promotion finally comes through and the hole in your chest doesn't close, you can turn to Him instead of chasing the next title. When the new car feels incredible for 6 days and disturbingly empty by the 7th, you can turn to Him instead of shopping for the next upgrade. When the relationship or the milestone you were sure would finally complete you settles into ordinary Tuesdays like everything else did, you can turn to Him instead of scrolling for what's next. When you've finally gotten the exact life you used to daydream about, and it still somehow feels like nothing, you can turn to Him, not as a consolation prize, but as the actual answer the ache was pointing toward the entire time. Solomon's story ends in exhaustion, having tried everything under the sun and named it vanity with his own mouth. Zacchaeus' story ends in his own home, at a table, having given nearly everything away and hearing the word salvation spoken over his house. The difference was never how much either man had, it was what or who each one was ultimately reaching for. You were never designed to be satisfied by anything smaller than the one who placed eternity in your chest to begin with. No house, no title, no vehicle, no number in an account was ever going to be big enough, because none of them were built for that job. Only he was. Solomon proved it with unlimited resources so that you wouldn't have to spend your own life running the same experiment to find out. Thank you so much for watching Bible Life Guide. If this names something you've been quietly feeling, even in the middle of real success, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next deep dive into God's Word. Here's your challenge this week. Do one act of service for someone who can never pay you back and may never even find out it was you. Cover a stranger's bill. Help a neighbor with something they're too proud to ask for help with. Give away something you actually value. And tell no one. Don't do it to feel better about your own success. And don't do it expecting the feeling of emptiness to vanish overnight. Do it as a small, deliberate reminder that the ache you're carrying was never going to be solved by anything you could keep for yourself. Solomon spent a lifetime and a fortune finding that out the hard way. Zacchaeus found it the moment he let go of his grip on what he'd spent his whole life accumulating. Practice one act of unconditional service this week and pay attention to what actually feels full afterward and what, quietly, still doesn't.